Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first chapel of our spring semester. Would you stand with us as we worship the Lord this morning? Where was the darkness when hope was restored? Where was despair when my God split the shores? And where was defeat when the Lord took a breath? When he stood in power by the grave that he left? Nowhere, nowhere, nowhere is the fear when my King resurrects. Nowhere, nowhere, nowhere was the doubt when my King conquered death. Yeah. Where was the sorrow when dry bones arose? And where was the pain when the sick touched the robe? And where was disgrace when the King laid to rest? The stronghold of sin by the grace he possessed. Nowhere, nowhere, nowhere is the fear when my King resurrects. Nowhere, nowhere, nowhere was the doubt when my King conquered death. Nowhere, nowhere, nowhere is the fear when my King resurrects. Nowhere, nowhere, nowhere was the doubt when my King conquered death. Nowhere. Let's declare this out. I see joy rising. I see joy rising. I hear hope calling. I see fear hiding. I hear chains falling. I see walls shaking. I hear doubt running. 'Cause my God's on his way. Yes, he is coming. I see joy rising. I hear hope calling. I see fear hiding. I hear chains falling. I see walls shaking. I hear doubt running. 'Cause my God's on his way. Yes, he is coming. Here, now here, now here in his presence my shame disappears. Now here, now here, I stand undefeated when Jesus is near. Now here, now here, now here in his presence my shame disappears. Now here, now here, I stand undefeated when Jesus is near. I see joy rising. I hear hope calling. I see fear hiding. I hear chains falling. I see walls shaking. I hear doubt running. 'Cause my God's on his way. Yes, he is coming. I see joy
without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three and one. God of glory, majesty, oh praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three and one. God of glory, majesty, oh praise forever to the King of Kings. And the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who'd come to the Father are restored. And the church of Christ was born, then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of love shall not kneel, shall not fade. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three and one. God of glory, majesty, oh praise forever to the King of Kings. Oh praise forever to the King of Kings. Yeah, Lord, thank you just for this time to worship you and praise your name. And you're so deserving of everything that we have to offer you. And God, I just pray that you bless this time, Lord, and bless the message, God, that it would speak to our hearts. Thank you for the snow. And I just pray that we continue to focus on you today. Amen. Also, there is a group coming this Friday. They're called Circuit Riders, and they will be at the Historic Church at 6 p.m., and they're going to share the gospel. So everyone's welcome.
Thank you, worship band. That was awesome. Thank you for that time. So I just wanted to have a few quick announcements, and then we'll introduce your speaker for today. So one quick announcement is that as you noticed today, we're scanning as we come in again. It seemed to give us a lot of problems at the very beginning of the year. I've learned that there's not good Wi-Fi in here, and so we've moved it out there, and it seems to be working better. And so my just one request is that you come just a little bit earlier. You can't come right at 10. You have to come a little bit before so you can get in case there's a line. So if you could just come right after class, and then we'll get you scanned in. We'll open the doors at least by 10 till. We'll try to open them at quarter till so we can make sure to get everyone in. Second thing is I just want to remind you, this is that we're not supposed to have food or drinks inside of this space. And so just to help keep it safe and looking good and not having stains everywhere, we just want to remind you that you can have your coffee drink out in the atrium, but we don't want to bring those in. If you want to just bring in your water, that would be great. I'll talk about some more announcements later on next chapel, but those are the two that I wanted to hit for today. I wanted to leave time for President Janzen. He comes to share with us today. Today is the beginning of the Exaudio lecture series. Exaudio is the hearing and then putting into practice of what God is speaking to us through His Word. Right? So audio, hearing, and then X is to execute, right? To put into practice what we hear from God. And so I'm asking Dr. Doug Miller to come, and he's going to introduce our speaker for today's and this series, the Exaudio lecture series. It started in 2017, I think was our first one. So this is our fifth iteration of the Exaudio lecture series. And Dr. Miller's been foundational in helping get that going and running that. So Dr. Miller, would you please help us introduce our speaker for today?
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. Just to explain a little bit of what Exaudio is about, in addition to what he just mentioned, it's an annual academic lectureship in which a scholar is invited to present on a meaningful expression of Christian discipleship that arises from his or her professional discipline. The purpose of the lectureship is to challenge and encourage believers in their individual and collective calling of work and service for Christ and His kingdom. So we're pleased to have as our lecturer this year our new Tabor president, Dr. David Janzen. Dr. Janzen's academic training is in the discipline of computer science, in which, along with mathematics, he earned his undergraduate degree from Tabor College. He completed his master's and PhD degrees in computer science at the University of Kansas. I won't say more about his credentials this morning, since I understand he's going to be sharing such details during his lecture. Dr. Janzen is a native of Independence, Kansas, and Eden, Oklahoma. He and his wife, Karen, are the parents of 4 adult children. Dr. Janzen's presentation this morning is entitled Career or Calling, Asking the Right Questions. So please welcome Dr. Janzen.
Thank you, Doug. Good morning, Tabor. Happy spring semester. What a difference from fall semester. That was the last time I was here. I want to say a couple of thank yous, and in particular, thank you, Doug, for inviting me to speak today, and thank you, Wendell Lowen, for filling in when last time I couldn't make it. So you remember I was supposed to do this like back in October, I think it was, and the Saturday before that Monday, I got diagnosed with COVID, and so with very little notice, Dr. Wendell Lowen stepped up and said, I'll fill in. And so thank you very much. I appreciate that. And it's just great to be here. I'm so glad you're here on this snowy, wintry day. Wasn't it beautiful? Yeah? Okay. I thought it was pretty awesome. And I was just delighted to come. Very different, as I mentioned, from last time. Are we up here? Not yet. There we go. Okay, so here's our title, Career or Calling, Asking the Right Questions. If you remember from the fall chapel, many of you were here, and I talked about two things. One, posture matters. So whether you're leaning back, sitting up, or leaning in is an indication of your heart in a way and your mind of whether you're paying attention. Are you ready to learn? Are you interested? Are you eager to hear what God might have for you? And so I encourage you to sit up and to lean in regularly here in your classes in life. And the second major thing that we talked about was I invited you to consider, if you weren't already on this path, to consider a new way of living, walking on the narrow path, talking about Luke 13, how Jesus invites us to a narrow path that leads to a narrow door, and few will find it. What I've been delighted to hear is, since that time, is many of you are doing these things. I hear from faculty and staff who say, yeah, students actually even talked about it. Yeah, I'm sitting up, I'm leaning in. Or did you notice in chapel there were students over there leaning in when something got interesting? And I know of many of you who have made first-time commitments to Jesus Christ and said, I want to be on that narrow path. Or others who knew the Lord but are leaning into that and saying, I want to understand what it means to walk on that narrow path and truly understand what it means to be obedient to Jesus Christ. And so I'm just praising the Lord for those things those things are happening here at Tabor College. And I'm so encouraged by all of that. Today I want to talk about asking great questions. So for more than 20 years, I taught computer science and software engineering. And as a professor, one of the things that I noticed is that many of the best students asked a lot of questions. There seemed to be a correlation there. Learning to ask good questions was connected to being a really good student. And you might think, well, the good students, they know everything, right? They don't need to ask questions. But it was just the opposite. I remember one of my first years at Cal Poly, one of our top students in the capstone, a young lady that had basically a 4.0 coming into her senior year and had never done computer science before, and she had suffered from imposter syndrome and struggled with, do I belong here? She had excelled. She had worked really hard, and one of the things she had learned to do was ask a lot of great questions, and she would come to my office for office hours. Top student in the class, and yet she was the one coming to office hours because she just wanted to make sure, did I understand this correctly? And just clarifying some things, and in class asking questions that others were afraid to ask. So I believe a college education shouldn't just give you all the answers. It should teach you to ask great questions and then to know how to search for answers to those questions. Well, the Exaudio series, the lecture, is about vocation, about career, figuring out what is God calling you to. And so as you think about what's God's will in my life, or even if that's not the question you're asking, maybe you're just saying, what am I going to do when I grow up? Okay, what am I going to do when I finish college? What's my major? What's my career going to be? You might ask some of these questions, at least I did when I was sitting in your seat as a college student. Things like, what do I want to do in a career or a job? Or what do I need to do because it would pay money or whatever? Can I even do it? Am I qualified? Can I learn to do those things or gain those skills? Will it make me happy? Will it earn me the most amount of money? Will this be the most fun? Will it make the most difference in the world? These were questions that I would regularly ask, and I still sometimes do, but I'd like to suggest today that they're maybe not the best questions to be asking. I say here they're questionable questions. Perhaps there are better questions that we might be asking. And so I want you to pay attention to the questions that I ask throughout my journey. I've used this Venn diagram with a number of students over the years, and I think I saw it probably when I was a Tabor student, something along these lines. When you're thinking about a career, what's a great place to go? Well, if you can be right in the middle of all three of these, where all three of these circles intersect, doesn't that seem about ideal? If you can find a career, a job that is something you love to do, and it pays well, and you're capable, you can do it, that's really an ideal place to be, right? It's kind of not ideal if you can only do one of these, or maybe even two of them. So for instance, take what I love to do and what pays well, but I'm no good at it. Well, you're probably not going to last very long in that job if you're no good at it. You're probably going to get fired or let go or just get so frustrated because you can't do it. Or what if it's something that you love to do and you're good at it but doesn't pay any money? Well, that's not going to last very long either. Unless you've got some really wealthy benefactor who's taking care of you, you probably need to earn enough money to pay rent and so on. And the same way with the other one. It pays well and you're good at it, but you don't really enjoy it. It's not something you love to do. And I think a lot of people end up with a career that is in that area. And it pays the bills and it's fine. And sometimes that's a reasonable way to go. I would suggest that this is maybe not always still the best way of thinking about it. I think it's helpful as you think about careers and possible paths, but I think there are even better questions. Now, today, Exaudio is supposed to bring in a scholar on this area of vocation. And right away, I have to disappoint everybody and say, that's not me. I am not, that is not my area of scholarship. In fact, I even question, I've never thought of myself as much of a scholar. If I am a scholar, it would be in this narrow little area of test-driven development. That's what I did my PhD research on. I've done a lot of funded grants and research and teaching over the years in that area. It's something that is I've published in, and it's very interesting to me, but I'm guessing for most of you it's like, that's not what I want to hear about today. And so I'm not going to talk about test-driven development today. If you want to know more, come and ask me and we'll talk more. But what I can do is say, this is what God has done in my life. And so I am an expert on me, I guess, that I know how God has led me along the way and what vocation, what calling looked like in my life. And so as I share my testimony, as I share my story, I hope that it invokes wonder for you. Not that you're wondering at, wow, look at what cool things God did for you, but instead you're thinking about, if God did that in his life, what's God going to do in my life? That's what I think a great testimony should invoke us to do, is think about, what is God, how is God going to work in my life? And so please consider that as we go through today. And so bear with me. As you know, 6 months ago, I became the 14th president at Tabor College. How in the world did this happen? Was this a series of random events? Or was it a secret plan that I'd had for the last 40 years, hatched back in middle school, thinking, someday I'm going to be a president of a college, and this is how I'm going to get there? Well, I would say it was probably neither of those. That was certainly not the case. So I'm just going to pick up. I grew up in a Christian home and was very blessed by that, to have godly parents who were married for 56 years until my father passed away in 2020. And they took us to church. They taught us about God. I went to the public school in Independence, Kansas, till I was 16. Last 2 years, we moved to Enid, Oklahoma, and I went to a private Christian school, Oklahoma Bible Academy in Enid, Oklahoma. And then I came in fall of 1986 to Tabor College, and thinking that I'm going to be a high school math teacher is what I came thinking. I dove into things. I loved college. I played soccer. I was in choir. I was in band. I was in campus ministries. I loved mathematics. I got encouraged to also do computer science, so I added that as a second major. I loved the lifelong friendships I was starting to build during that time. This is an example of just some of those friends and some sort of a choir event or a carol singing event that we were at. During Christmas break of my first year, one of my new good friends, Jared Gensel, came down to Enid, Oklahoma, just to hang out and spend some time together, and we started thinking, what might we do next summer? We're ready for an adventure, okay? And so we didn't have the internet. We couldn't go look there. So actually, we went to the library and we started looking at books on jobs and opportunities. And we had to do those kinds of things back then. And in particular, I started asking questions of, I've been in a little bit of a Christian bubble. I went to a Christian high school for 2 years and now at Tabor for a semester. And I loved it. I loved being surrounded by people who loved the Lord. But was my faith genuine? What would I be like if I was not surrounded by Christians? Would I still be a Christian? Would I care enough about them to share my faith with them, to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with them? And so those two things combined, interested in an adventure and wondering, is my faith genuine, led me to a camp, not a Christian camp, a rich kids camp in New Hampshire. I spent the summer teaching water skiing at Camp Cody on Lake Ossipee, New Hampshire. It was a blast. And I encourage you, do great things, do fun things in your summer. It's great if you can find things that pay well, but it's one of the few times in your life when you're in college that you can do some really interesting, different kinds of jobs. I actually did this twice. I went back after my junior year at Tabor. I had so much fun. We would get up early, 6 in the morning, go out while the lake was glassy, and we would ski ourselves as counselors, and I even learned to barefoot water ski. That's the picture there on the right. And then during the day, I would teach kids how to water ski, and it was great. And it was just what I had hoped. I found one Christian out of about 200 people at the camp, campers and counselors. I found one Christian, and so I was very much an island, it felt like. And I was excited to see, I was encouraged that I did love the Lord and I did want to share Christ with those whom I was around. And I came back to Tabor with that excitement and enthusiasm and wanted to grow more in my understanding of God's word so that I was better prepared to be out in the world sharing the gospel. with others. And so as I come back to Tabor, I'm thinking more about my major and getting into sophomore year and thinking, what am I studying? What career am I going to do? I was originally thinking I was going to be a high school math teacher, but they made me take Intro to Ed. And in Intro to Ed, I had to go and observe in a high school, and I decided I do not want to teach high school math. The crowd control, the students in the back that were like, I don't want to be here. And I was really enjoying the college level math as well. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm going to be a college math professor. And I was exploring that. But I had a little bit of this tension that I really was growing in my faith. And aren't all great Christians going on to be pastors and missionaries? Isn't that what I'm supposed to do as a Christian? And so I was wrestling with that. I've got these interests and even competencies that God, I think, has given me in math and computer science. And along came this wonderful lady, Bev Holmskog. Anybody here remember Bev? Some of you may be taught with Bev. Very interesting person. She taught English for a little while here at Tabor College, and she had an office in the basement of the library. And I like to study in those little rooms of the library. And one day I was leaving from studying, and I hear my name, David, come in here. It was Bev Holmskog. And she's an interesting character. And this is the first time that I met her. And I came in there, and she knew my older sister because my older sister had gone to Tabor and was an English major. And Bev said, I hear that you are thinking about maybe being a pastor or a missionary, but you're also good at this math and computer science thing. God needs Christian engineers. That's what she told me. She said, you can take math and computer science into places in the corporate world or research that a pastor or missionary will never go. And she just encouraged me to consider how God might use the skills that he's given me to go into places that I might not otherwise go. And it just started me thinking about a number of things. It's just what I needed to know. Bev ended up being a lifelong friend, and we were in touch with her for many, many years. So as I'm growing as a sophomore and a junior, and trying to do my best. I cared about academics. I really wanted to be the best mathematician and computer scientist that I could be. How might I do that? Well, along came another professor, Frank Brenneman, a professor of mathematics. He'd been my advisor since I started. And he encouraged me, and again, my good friend Jared Gensel, to consider going to do a study abroad. Budapest Semesters in Mathematics was a relatively young program for North American mathematics students to go to Budapest, Hungary, and study there. Well, that sounded, again, the theme of an adventure. It sounded like an adventure. And the opportunity to be overseas, to live with the family in Hungary, and to be in an elite mathematics program sounded like a challenge. I was a little scared, but excited about that. And so I did. I went and I spent a semester doing a study abroad in Budapest, Hungary. And I'll just pause there and say, I encourage every one of you to consider doing a study abroad. It is so good for changing your thinking, opening your mind to other people's perspectives. The world doesn't see everything the way you do. The world, other people don't see current events, faith, relationships in the same way as your upbringing has. And it's so good to go out and live, not just visit for a day or two or a week, but to actually live and spend a few months in another culture and get to know things from their perspective. So that's my encouragement. Take the time to do that. So as I'm finishing up my time at Tabor, I decided to apply for graduate school because I'm going into math, maybe going to be a math professor. And I had been accepted to the University of Kansas to go, and an opportunity came up that answered a question of, how might I give back to Tabor? I appreciated so much the experience that I'd had as a Tabor student. There were things to complain about. There always is for college students. But people had poured into me in such meaningful ways, faculty and staff, and the extended family of Tabor had blessed me so much in all the donations and the scholarships that came to make it so that I could afford to come. And I had some student loans still, but I never would have been able to come to Tabor without all of that generosity. And so is there a way that I could give back? Well, an opportunity came up to go on Harvest Crew. And Harvest Crew was this music and drama group that went for 6 months. We spent the summer mostly going to camps, Christian camps, and performing, leading in worship, doing skits, and then being counselors and loving on these kids. And then most of the fall, then traveling around to different churches. And it was just a fantastic experience. And my younger sister Julie, was able to go with me. And so that was a cool kind of last time of spending close with one of my siblings before I went off into the real world. As I came back then and started graduate school at the University of Kansas, I was immediately thrown into graduate school in a math program where I was surrounded by people who did not know Jesus. I remember one person in particular, a really intelligent math PhD student from China, who started asking me questions as soon as he heard that I was a Christian. And they were hard questions. They were really hard. This is a really intelligent guy. And he wasn't antagonistic. He wasn't angry about it. He was genuinely curious, but skeptical. And he just asked the deepest, hardest questions. He was kind of fascinated with the paranormal or the supernatural and really wanted to understand, how do you hear God? You say that, God speaks to you or God reveals things to you, and he just wanted to know these things. And he was studying the Bible and asking questions. And I could answer some of his questions, but not all of them. And so it forced me to go home and be studying my Bible. It's like, okay, I don't know. How do I answer him? And then go back the next day. Okay, I think this is the answer. And I was living in what was a very dark place. I was not surrounded by Christians. But fortunately, I found the Navigators. And they were a Christian organization at the University of Kansas. And as many of you maybe heard, Mike Jordahl, who was here for the inauguration, spoke. He was my mentor for those 2 years when I was doing my master's degree. And what a blessing it was to be in this dark place of graduate school, but to have someone, a godly man who knew the scriptures really well, pouring into me on a weekly basis and helping me study the scriptures, helping me learn what it means to be a disciple and how to make disciples. And so that was a great experience for me at the University of Kansas. One of the burning questions throughout all of this was relationships. Am I going to get married? Should I get married? And if so, to whom? Well, towards the end of this time, finishing my master's degree, that question really came to the forefront of are you going to get married? Let's roll back just a little bit. As a freshman at Tabor, I met this young lady, Karen Isaac, who then as a sophomore, when we were in March, we were going on spring break choir tour. It was actually a 2-week tour from Kansas to California. And early on, maybe on the first day of that tour, we kind of all tossed our pillows onto the bus, and they'd land somewhere, and that's who you were going to sit with. And our pillows landed next to each other. And so we sat together for a really long drive that first day, and we talked. And we talked, and we laughed, and we talked some more. And for some crazy reason, almost every day after that, our pillows ended up in the same places. And we talked, and we laughed, and we talked, and we got to know each other more. And as I look back now, that's when we fell in love. I see that. She, however, had already committed to going to Fresno Pacific for her last 2 years, and I, in my infinite wisdom at the time, and I was completely wrong, said, long-distance relationships don't work, and so we broke up. But we kept in touch, and fast forward to, as I'm finishing my master's degree, she called me and said, hey, our good friend Linda is getting married in Iowa. That's right next to Kansas. Would you come meet me at the wedding? I said, sure. 5-hour drive later, I get to the wedding. We met. We came back to Lawrence. She stayed with our friend Bev Holmskog, and we had a great weekend together. And as I'm driving her back to the airport, I asked her the question, which was the elephant in the room. So you think we'd ever date again? She looked at me and said, David, I could marry you in a second. I about swerved off the road, landed in the ditch, and said, what? She said, but if that's not what God has for me, then, we'll see. And so I put her on the plane, she goes back, and there's this big question mark. And I remember going out, seeking God, what's the answer to this? And he revealed to me Proverbs 13:12. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. And for me, that jumped off the page as you've been deferring hope in this relationship for years now. It's time to fulfill that longing and take the next step. And so fast forward 10 months and 3 long distance dates later, and we got married. Yeah, and it was the best decision of my life, absolutely. And don't you love those fashions of 1993? So 28 years ago, we got married, and we started this wonderful journey of, it's just been such a joy to be married to my best friend. Although fashions have changed, the joy just continues all the more. About this same time, so I was finishing my master's degree, and I thought I was going to get a PhD in computer science and teach computer science at this point, but there were lots of problems at the University of Kansas, and it was derailing my plan, so I was applying to other PhD programs. There was some infighting in the department, and you had to be real careful who you chose as your advisor, and so I thought, this isn't the place to go. And a friend came and said, hey, I just interviewed for a job at Sprint. It's not for me, but I think it's perfect for you. The job involves Lisp programming and expert systems and artificial intelligence, and it was just what I'd been doing in my master's degree. And I thought, but wait a minute, I've made my plans that I'm going to go and I'm going to be a professor. This looks really interesting. Does it make sense to change and go another direction? And so starting to ask God, am I supposed to do this? And it was, I believed, a way of God directing my steps towards another route. Maybe it was just a pause, and sure enough, it ended up being that. It was 5 years that I spent there doing really interesting work. I love this business card. I put it on there because my official title was Artificial Intelligence Analyst. That was my job title. And my parents, when they heard that was my first real job, they were like, what? You went to school all this time and you don't even have real intelligence? You just have artificial? I don't get it. Which was great. At the end of that time, this is where I really want you to pay attention. I started to ask better questions. I had asked some decent questions, and I would say that throughout my life, I had been asking God for wisdom. I had this great Sunday school teacher way back in like 4th grade who had encouraged me and said that in James 1, it says, anyone who lacks wisdom must ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. And I had claimed that for years and regularly, daily asking God, give me wisdom. But I still asked a lot of selfish questions. What do I want to do? What's going to pay me the most? What am I good at? And I finally started to ask the question, God, what do you want me to do? And so if you leave today, I'm not wrapping up quite yet, but if you leave today with nothing else, that's the primary thing I want you to hear, is I hope that you can short circuit that. For me, it was around age 27, 28, when I started asking that question. Perhaps you can start earlier than I did, of asking God, what do you want me to do today? God is the creator of the universe, the creator of you. He knows you and your future better than you do. Better than anyone else does, better than your parents do, better than your professors do. God knows you intimately, and he knows what's coming. So if you ask him to direct you, and you truly learn how to listen to what that is, I believe he'll take you on an adventure that might be different than what you expected, but will be great. It will be wonderful. It will be better than anything that you would have expected. So that's the primary lesson that I hope that you'll hear today. For me, this came at a point where I'd been at Sprint for 5 years, and I got a call out of the blue from a man named Richard Rimple. He was a math professor at Bethel College. I had gotten to know him when I was a student at Tabor, and he said, didn't you want to become a professor? We desperately need a computer science professor at Bethel. Would you leave your high-paying job in industry and come and teach for us? And right away, my answer was, no way. Why would I do that? I don't want to. I'm going to at least cut my salary in half. And to go to Bethel, that's the rival of Tabor. My Tabor friends will give me such grief. There's no way I can do that. But that's when we started asking this question, God, what do you want us to do? And through much discernment, looking into God's word, talking to godly people that we trusted, and much prayer, we believed this was God's will to go and do this. And then it became a question of courage and obedience. So are we going to do it? If we believe it's God's will, we could still say no. But how miserable are we going to be if we say no to what we believe is God's will. And so we thought, we have to do it. And so we did. So we went to Bethel College, and I taught there for 7 years, and we immediately started doing ministry with college students, and I loved it. We had Bible studies in our home. Here's an example of some of these students, and you can see this was in a time when we were having our babies. I think this was maybe like 2 or 3 days after our second son, Simon, was born. And that was the day that we normally had Bible study, so everybody just came on over, and they all met Simon, and we just had such fruitful ministry, we felt like, during that time. And I was known as the evangelical on campus at Bethel. They'd let me speak in chapel once a year and say, okay, that's enough. But I loved it. We were free to do ministry, and so. But then the next question of, God, what do you want me to do? Came up of, after 7 years, I was able to get tenure with just a master's degree, which was a rare thing, but because it was computer science and it's hard to hire in that area. And I got a sabbatical, and everything I wanted to do on the sabbatical required a PhD. I was like, well, maybe I should get a PhD. But I'd never been really excited about doing research. But finally, this topic had just come out, test-driven development and agile software development, and I was kind of interested. And I said, there are some questions that need to be answered. And so, sure enough, in just pursuing God and what do you want us to do, we decided, yes, we're supposed to go and do the PhD. And so I cut my salary in half again, and I think we were making about $12,000 a year with a family of 4. But God sustained us through that, and we had a wonderful experience doing the PhD at KU. Continuing to ask those questions as I'm finishing the PhD, a job came up at Cal Poly that just looked perfect for me, and I thought, that looks really interesting, but I never saw myself going to the public university. I thought I was going to be maybe in a private Christian college. But after praying through it and asking God, what do you want us to do? We got a strong sense of, I want you to go be a missionary in the public university. I want you to be a tent maker. The state of California is going to pay your salary. You had to get a PhD. Well, God had to give me a PhD, is how I would view it, in order to get there, and I had to work hard at it, but it gave me a platform. And every quarter, at the beginning of every class, I would say, at the beginning of the semester, essentially, I would say, I want you to know that I'm a Christian. You have a lot of faculty who believe a lot of different things, and in the spirit of inclusivity and diversity, I want you to know that you have a professor who loves Jesus Christ. And I would briefly share the gospel, and I would invite people, if you want to have a further conversation, please come and talk to me. And so for 15 years, I did that kind of ministry, and we were very involved with Asian American Christian Fellowship and saw lots of students come to know the Lord through that. Here's an example of the class. These were my graduates. These are our software engineering graduates 1 year and one of the other faculty members during that time. Also during that time, asking, what about our house? Our boys had chosen to share a room because there was this little Lego room hidden in the closet, so we had an extra bedroom in the house. And God had started to stir our hearts towards adoption. Is there room in our hearts and in our home to adopt? And so sure enough, we did. On the right is June. We adopted June when she was 11 years old from foster care. And then a few years later, her sister, who had already been adopted but was back in foster care, came to us as well, Amber. And we are so delighted. Yes, Amber is here today. Amber started as a college student at Tabor just this last interterm, and it's a delight to have her here with us. This is at Amber's adoption, actually, and I just have always loved this picture. It almost brings tears to my eyes every time that I look at it. And these are our 4 children. Other questions. God, what do you want me to do? How should I serve in the church? So here's a quick view of, this is Easter Sunday. This is my regular view. It's maybe hard to tell, but this is from the drum set. Looking out over, we would set up Easter at the Rock. So Morro Bay, California, right on the ocean, there's this massive rock and a big parking lot, and we'd set up 1,500 chairs, and we would host an outdoor Easter service every year. And I got to play drums for that regularly, and that was a part of the service as well that we did in the church, and being an elder and teaching Sunday school and college ministry there. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow night at the Exaudio lecture about entrepreneurship, so I'm going to go briefly here. But how might God use entrepreneurship for building his kingdom? So here's an example of Karen and I being at London at the BET conference, a big, massive education technology conference, Google would invite us into the booth to show off our app, the Squid app that my company had created. And it was great. This was an example where one of my former students happened to be a Google employee and happened to be at London in that booth. And so we got to meet Abby. What a fun connection that was. And this is an example of somebody that I had shared the gospel with earlier and was now in her career and was asking interesting questions. So again, God, what do you want me to do? Is there an opportunity as a professor of computer science to take the gospel to the nations? And again, I had another opportunity with a sabbatical to go and be in East Asia and Southeast Asia. And that's a whole nother story, but what a great opportunity it was to go using the platform of being a computer science professor to get my foot in the door into universities and share the gospel in those places. During that time as well, we saw a great example of business as mission, and I'll tell you more about this, Global English School. I'll share a little bit more about this tomorrow night, but a great example of how we can use business in order to accomplish the mission and furthering God's kingdom. And then finally, we kind of get to this point. Last year, I was trying to slow down. I was thinking, there's just too much going on. My research is going really well. My company is going really well. Ministry was going really well, but it's too much. I've got to cut something. So how do I slow down? God, what do you want me to do? Without going into all the details, apparently it was this. I don't know that this is slowing down, but it became clear that this was what God wanted me to do and was calling me to this. You see a couple of familiar faces maybe there. You remember last fall, that nice, warm, sunny weather. We were all in shorts and T-shirts, different than the beginning of the spring semester, but that weather is coming back. And what a joy it is to be here and to be with you. So as I wrap up, these are some of the questionable questions that you might be used to asking. I encourage you to change that and ask them things like this. God, what do you want me to do today? God, are you in this opportunity, whatever it may be? Am I making this decision out of fear or by faith? And I encourage you to choose faith. Have courage as you go through this. How do we hear his answer? That's a whole nother sermon, but I'll briefly just mention here. Be in relationship with Christ, with God. Spend time with him and his word and his people. You've got to have that context to be able to hear him, I believe. An idea might come to you from God's word, from someone else, a friend or an adult, a teacher. Might come from just yourself, an idea pops into your mind, or from God himself. He may reveal some idea to you. And evaluate that idea. Just because you hear something, just because someone says, I think you should do this, doesn't mean you should do it. Think about it, evaluate it carefully. And I think all of these should apply. Is it consistent with God's word? This opportunity? Yourself today and every day. We're going to close, and I'm going to invite Ryan Vaughn up. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Janzen. Just real quick, if you were able to scan coming in and you got a green bar at the bottom of your phone, you're good to go, and you are free. If you got a yellow bar or you couldn't scan for some reason, please come see me so you can get chapel credit for today. Thank you all for being here. You are dismissed. Please remember there is a second Exaudio session tomorrow night at 7 p.m. for Community Life Credit, so come and enjoy that. Thank you all.